Howdy, everyone. All right, well, the tail fairing is now finished, at least for now. I'll get back to that here in a second, but I'm going to consider this done. And well, let me just talk about it first, and then I'll get back to why it's not 100% complete. So first of all, underneath there are these trim pieces here, and the instructions say that you can cut these down on the top and fit some rubber weather stripping up in here, or you can just elect to keep the gap nice and tight and not worry about the rubber. There should not be any touching between this piece and the horizontal stabilizer. Van's instructions recommend up to, I think it's a 1/16 inch gap in here. So I've elected to do that. I thought that just looked a little bit cleaner than having a piece of rubber stuck up in here. This is not the actual flight hardware, of course. This is just some screws to help hold everything together. This transition here between the fairing and this trim piece, you can see that I've opted to cut around the fairing itself. My fairing was already shaped like this in this corner here. I see on some drawings it looks like this fairing had originally come all the way down, and it looked to me like maybe it wrapped around this front edge a little bit more, but I really didn't trim this that much. This is kind of how this came already, so I just basically left it like this and cleaned it up, and then I elected to trim this piece around it. The instructions show this trim piece, this aluminum trim piece, it comes all the way up here to grab this screw here. And I didn't like having the fiberglass laying on top of this piece because it left more of a gap on this front edge. So I decided to trim this aluminum piece out. I cut it out around the fairing piece so that the fairing could lay directly on this piece of aluminum, and this trim piece can also lay directly on this piece of aluminum rather than having these two stacked up on top of each other. And I did that on both sides. And you can see, of course, I'm using the standard method of attachment, just screws. I didn't want to remake the fairing. I didn't want to try to cut the fairing and split it and fit it and do all kinds of other things that people do. I just wasn't in the mood. I figured I can get this to fit good enough the way that Vans recommends you do it, so I'm happy with it. I trimmed this front edge here just a little bit because I wanted this edge to blend with this edge of this bottom trim piece. So this got cut back a little bit. The rest of it I haven't touched. It looks symmetrical enough. I like the shape of it enough that I'm just going to leave it. This is a arbitrary cut line here. This is just a little bit of a raised area. It's a reference line to use to cut. I actually think this looks worse than where it was actually cut, so I paid no attention to this reference line. I'm just going to sand this smooth before I paint the fairing. So I believe this front edge is just going to stay just like it is. In the back, nothing special back here either. I've already talked about the cutout here for the horizontal, or not the horizontal, but the elevator connecting rod goes through here, if you will. This all gets cut out for that. Make sure you've got full travel. And then again, just some screws along the back to hold it in place. So this whole fairing area, including these bottom pieces, these bottom trim pieces, this is all finished. One thing that I've experimented with, and it worked pretty well, on other pieces of fiberglass, you can heat the fiberglass and reshape it. And I did a little bit of an experiment. I forget where that was. It might have been back here. You can see I've got a little bit of a gap here, and there's a little bit of a gap here. I had taken this off, and just like I had done with other pieces of fiberglass, I had heated a little bit along this edge, and then while it was still warm, I bent it inward. and let it cool, and it would hold that shape. And then when I brought it up here and screwed it in place, it closed up the gap. And I forget where that was. Actually, it might have been down here somewhere. Anyway, I plan on doing more of that before I actually paint this fairing, is to take it off, heat it a little bit, and see if I can't roll these edges in and tighten up some of these gaps. The only problem with that is this is going to sit in the sun, and this is going to get awfully hot back here, sitting out potentially, and that will either relax all the work that I put into bending this to close up those gaps, or the piece itself is going to heat and want to expand, and it's just going to get wrinkly anyway. Not the end of the world. I'm not too concerned about that yet. I'll deal with that real time when it happens, if it happens. I don't see this plane sitting out in the sun much. I don't plan on showing it or anything like that. However, if I go to some kind of a fly-in meet or something, of course, it's going to be out in the sun. So that's yet to be determined. If I get wrinkles, if I get gaps, if it becomes an issue, this may get revisited at that point. But for now, I'm going to call this done. Of course, when I reassemble it permanently, I'll use the correct hardware. And that's that. So my plan now, take the fairing off, take the horizontal off, take the vertical off, put those back in the basement. And then I'm going to rearrange the shop back to the way that it was, because I've got my new gear leg fairings, and I'm going to try to install those next. So in order to do that, I got to rearrange everything and put it back to the way that it was, so that I can get my engine hoist up front and I have room to work on the gear legs. So that's next. So I will do some disassembly on the tail, rearrange the shop, and I'll talk to you guys later.